You think you know the story.
An old man, a sleigh, and gifts? That's just the surface. But the truth spans centuries.
From a bishop in ancient Turkey to the biggest marketing campaign in history.
This is Santa Claus like you've never heard him before.
All right, so when you think of Christmas, what's the first image that pops into your head? It's probably that jolly man in the red suit, right? Well, what if I told you he has a secret identity, a past that stretches back almost 2,000 years, and it's this wild mix of saints, pagan gods, and honestly, some seriously brilliant 19th century marketing. Yeah, you know this guy. I mean, we all do. Big, jolly, that classic white beard, and a laugh that, shakes his belly like a bowl full of jelly. You could make a strong case that he's the most recognizable face on the entire planet. But here's the thing, his story is not what you think it is. At all. So let's get into it. The man we call Santa Claus, he's kind of like a historical remix, a legend built up layer by layer over centuries. And today, we're gonna peel back every single one of those layers to get to the truth. So our story starts, and this might surprise you, not at the North Pole. Nope. We're heading way back to the sun-baked lands of the late Roman Empire, because this whole thing began with a real person. See, Saint Nicholas wasn't just some character in a fairy tale. He was a real guy, born into a pretty chaotic world. He lived through the Great Persecution, when being a Christian was incredibly dangerous. And then he saw it all flip on its head when the Emperor Constantine converted and Christianity went from being this hunted religion to the center of power. And you've got to understand that context because it explains the kind of, radical generosity he became famous for. And it's right here that you can see the first bits of the Santa Claus DNA coming together. Nicholas got this reputation for being incredibly generous, but also for giving gifts in secret. The most famous story about him, the one that really stuck, was how he secretly gave money for dowries to 3 poor girls to save them from a terrible fate. That story is what made him the patron saint of children. And his feast day, December 6th, that became the original Christmas, the first day for gift giving. Okay, but how on earth did a 4th century bishop from Turkey become the man in the red suit with a sleigh? That's the big question, right? Think of it like a giant, centuries-long game of telephone. Or maybe a relay race, where the story is the baton, and every culture that gets it adds its own little spin. So, as the legend of Saint Nick started traveling north across Europe, it started picking things up. It soaked up local myths and pagan traditions like a sponge. And one of the craziest influences, you gotta look at Norse mythology. The god Odin, he had a long white beard, and he was said to lead this ghostly wild hunt across the sky right in the middle of winter. So a bearded figure flying through the sky at night? Sound familiar? A lot of people are pretty convinced that parts of Odin's story got woven directly into the fabric of our winter gift bringer. Then bam, the Protestant Reformation hits, and it's this huge religious shakeup. Suddenly, a lot of people were discouraged from honoring saints. Martin Luther himself even suggested that gifts should be brought by the Christkind, the Christ child, on December 25th. And this was a huge turning point. It basically cut the direct tie to the real Saint Nicholas and shifted the whole gift-giving party to Christmas Day. But old habits die hard. The traditions didn't just vanish. In England, the figure kind of morphed into Father Christmas, who was all about feasting and good cheer, and this is the really important part. In the Netherlands, the tradition survived as Sinterklaas. He was still a bishop, still brought gifts, and he's the one who eventually hopped on a boat and headed for America. All right, now we're getting to the main event, because this is where all those different threads finally get tied together. The Santa Claus we know today, he's not some ancient European legend. Nope, he is, through and through, a 19th century American invention. And you know where he was born? New York City. So step 1, the name. In 1809, the famous author Washington Irving was writing this funny book about New York's Dutch history. He took the Dutch name Sinterklaas and, Americanized it into Santa Claus. He also got rid of the bishop robes and described him as this jolly sailor. The makeover had officially started. Next up, he needed a personality. And that came from a poem from 1823 that you definitely know. "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." This poem was an absolute game changer. It's what turned him into that jolly old elf. It gave him the sleigh, the 8 tiny reindeer, and for the very first time, it gave them their names. You know them: Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, and Vixen. And finally, the look, the image. For that, we have to thank a cartoonist named Thomas Nast. For over 20 years, he drew Santa for Harper's Weekly magazine. It was Nast who made him big and portly, gave him a workshop at the North Pole, and, this is huge, gave him that naughty or nice list. He basically drew the Santa we all picture in our heads. So think about that. In the span of about 60 years, you have these 3 huge American contributions that took a Dutch saint and created the complete package. You've got Washington Irving giving him the name, the poem giving him the personality and the reindeer, and Thomas Nast giving him the iconic look and the North Pole HQ. The whole shebang. Okay, so once America had built him, the 20th century took him global. You could say he went viral, 1900s style. Through movies, ads, and all kinds of media, this American version of Santa was exported from New York to, well, everywhere. He became one of the biggest commercial and cultural forces on the planet. And that brings us to maybe the biggest modern myth about Santa. I'm sure you've heard this one, that Coca-Cola invented the red suit just so he would match their logo, right? Yeah, that's actually not true. It's a great story, but it's a myth. Thomas Nast was drawing Santa in a red suit way back in the 1860s. But, and this is a big but, what Coca-Cola did do with their huge ad campaigns in the 1930s was lock that image in. They made it the standard. Their version of Santa, warm, kind, grandfatherly, that became the version everyone recognized all over the world. And the commercial influence just kept on coming. Here's a little piece of trivia for you. The most famous reindeer of them all, Rudolph, he wasn't one of the original 8. He was literally invented in 1939 as a marketing tool for a department store, Montgomery Ward. And as this American Santa traveled the globe, he kept changing and adapting to fit in. In Japan, for example, Christmas is a big deal, but it's mostly a secular celebration. In parts of India, they might decorate a mango tree instead of a pine tree. And get this, in Brazil, a soft drink company actually tried to launch a Santa who wore green and yellow, the colors of the Brazilian flag. And what I find really fascinating is how this global Santa has circled back to affect the original traditions. Take the Netherlands, the home of Santa Claus. Today, while tons of people still celebrate Santa Claus on December 6th, the data shows that almost half the country now also gives gifts on Christmas Day. The global version is that powerful. So when you boil it all down, what is Santa Claus? He's not one thing. He's this incredible blend, a synthesis of all these different pieces. A 4th century Turkish saint, a bit of Germanic folklore, some Old English traditions, and a whole lot of 19th century American poetry and art. So, the most important thing to remember is Santa Claus isn't a single person. He's a story that's been told and retold and tweaked for over 1,700 years. He's a collective creation built by everyone from saints to poets to ad executives. Each era adds its own little chapter, keeping the legend alive. And that really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? From a humble Turkish saint to a global brand, who will Santa Claus become next? Because this story, it's clearly not over. What do you think the next chapter in his secret history is going to be?
Thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories. Ho, ho, ho! Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas!